This is video 10.5, Surface Areas of Prisms and Cylinders. Let's start by defining what a prism is. A prism is a solid formed by polygons. Prisms have two congruent bases that lie in parallel planes, and the other faces of our prism are rectangles. So let's look at this first prism right here. This and this we will consider our two bases. Here we have rectangular shapes that make up the faces of our prism. So there's one. Here's another. So I have a front, a back, a top, and a bottom, which all make up my lateral faces. So I have two bases that lie in parallel planes, and I have four faces, and all of this make up my prism. Now, let's look at my prism unpacked. So let's start with this first front face, and we're going to draw it out like we opened up the box. So I'm going to draw my first rectangular face, right, which happens to be this one. Now I know that the dimensions of this rectangular face are 16 inches by a height of 9 inches, which you can see right here. Now the next face here you'll notice here that it has a height of 4 and again a length of 16. Now my front and my back of my shape are going to be the same size. So this one again is going to be 9 because it's going to be just like my front one here. And then we have the bottom, which would be here, which is 4 inches. So if I wanted to know the lateral surface area of this particular prism, I would just need to find the area of this rectangular shape. Right? You'll notice that these numbers added together also represent the perimeter of what I have identified as my base. Right? Now to make this simpler, let's also draw in my bases. So let's put it here. Here's one of my bases. And you'll notice that my bases are 9 by 4. And then I have a second base over here, which is also 9 by 4. Now when you're looking for surface area, you're trying to find out what the area of the shape is that forms my prism. The lateral surface area is this, and the bases are the two sides of my prism that are parallel to each other. Now, some important things to remember. The height of this prism is measured from base to base. So I would consider 16 inches to represent the height of this particular prism. The formula for finding surface area is taking the area of the two bases. Notice I represent base with a capital B because it's representing area, not a length, plus the perimeter of my base, remember we talked about that right here, times the height of my prism. The height is measured from base to base, so in this situation it's 16, and adding those two pieces together, which is the area of this plus the area of my two bases, should give me the surface area of my prism. So let's plug in what we know here. For this particular prism, my surface area equals 2 of the bases, which are 9 by 4, plus the perimeter of my base, which we've kind of identified here, is 9 plus 4 plus 9 plus 4, so that would be this side, times the height, which is measured from base to base, which is 16. So now let's start to solve this. If I take 2 times 9 times 4, I get 72, plus, if I add all these two together, I get 26 times 16, or 72 plus 416, and added together would give me 488 inches. And it's squared because I'm talking about a two-dimensional shape. I'm talking about what we call the net of this particular prism. So this would be my answer. Now let's review the vocabulary. A prism is a solid formed by polygons. Prisms have two congruent bases, so that means that my two bases are the same size, or the same area, that lie in parallel planes. My bases are parallel to each other. The other faces of my prism are rectangles. Well, you can see this is true of this particular one. The lateral faces of my prism are not the bases, and they are made up of rectangles. So you'll find for a prism that the lateral faces are always rectangles. The surface area of my prism is found using this formula, which is what we just used. The two bases plus the perimeter times the height. Notice that a capital B is used because it's area of a base, and a capital H is used because I'm not talking about the height of a face, but I'm talking about the height measured from base to base of a 3D prism. Right, let's look at another prism. Now, you'll notice that this prism is a triangular prism. The lateral faces must be rectangles, so here and here would be considered my bases. So my prism's laying on its side again. And my bases are triangles. So if I were to draw out the net of this particular shape, or this particular prism, I might start with this face right here. Okay, which is a rectangle. Right? We know that this rectangle is 25 by 30. Now, let's think about what the rectangle on the bottom of this prism would be. So we're going to draw that rectangle, which is represented by what's laying on the bottom here. Now this particular rectangle also is 30 by 24. And then the final piece of my lateral surface area of this prism is going to be this back end piece here. Which also has a height of 30, but side length of 7. So this piece together represents the lateral surface area of the prism represented here. Now this prism also has two bases which are triangular in shape. So let's try to draw those. So here's one of them. They have a height of 24. So you notice this side length is 24. Here's the other one. And they have a base of 7. So again, let's use our formula. 2 bases, actually let's draw this in purple so that it represents the colors used in our shape. 2 bases plus, then we're going to use my lateral surface area, which is the perimeter of my base times my height. So that's going to be this right here. The perimeter being the length of this side here. Oops. So let's start by finding the dimensions of my 2 bases. Now this time we're talking about a triangle. So it's 2 times the base times, now we're talking about triangular height, which is 24, times 1/2. So that would represent my 2 bases, plus the perimeter, or this, which is 25 plus 24 plus 7. That would be the perimeter of my triangular base, times the height of my prism, which is measured from base to base. So it's going to be this measurement, which is 30. Now let's solve. If I multiply this out, I get 168 plus 56 times 30, or 168 plus 1,680. If I add these two together, I get 1,848. And then again, it's centimeters squared because I'm talking about a 2-dimensional figure. Because I'm finding the area of this prism's net. So we have a rectangular prism here and a triangular prism here. And in both situations, we've used the formula for surface area. Now let's look at another kind of shape. This shape is not considered a prism because it is not formed by polygons. It has bases that are circles, and this particular shape is on its side. This shape is what we call a cylinder. A cylinder is a solid with 2 congruent circular bases that lie in parallel planes. So that means that my 2 bases here, one here and one here, are parallel to each other and they're congruent, so they're the same area. The lateral surface area of a cylinder is the curved surface of the cylinder. If you think of a can, it is the label on a can. So if you think of like a can of soup or a can of beans, it's what would be the label around the can. That would be what we consider our lateral surface area. The lateral area of a cylinder is the area of the lateral surface, or the label of the can. Now, surface area of a cylinder is measured by taking the two bases plus the circumference, so instead of perimeter we're going to use circumference, times the height. And again, a capital B is used for basis because we're talking about the area of the circles. So our formula is 2 bases plus circumference times height will give us the surface area of a cylinder. This is our base, as well as this. And this wrapper, or this curved area around our cylinder, is what we call the lateral surface area. So let's start by drawing a net. For our cylinder, we have two bases, each with a diameter of 18. These are my two bases. We also have this shape here, which would be the wrapper around the can. This measures the distance between my two bases, which would be considered the height of my cylinder, which happens to be 19 yards. And this dimension here is what we would call the circumference. So let's plug in the numbers and find the surface area of this particular shape. So to start, I'm going to find the two bases. So I'm going to take 2 times. Now the formula for the area of a circle is pi r squared. Currently we know the diameter, but we also know that the radius would be 9 because it's half the diameter. So it's going to be 2 pi 9 squared plus, we know that circumference equals diameter pi, or another way to look at it is 2 radius pi. So we're going to add to this the circumference times the height, which will give us the area of this lateral surface area here. So our circumference is diameter, which is 18 pi, times the height of our cylinder, which is 19, and that should give us our surface area. So let's solve. Alright, we're going to leave this in terms of pi. So this becomes 2 times 81 times pi plus, and over here we're going to get, if we take 18 times 19, I get 342 pi. So I end up with 162 pi plus 342 pi. Now you'll notice here that these are like terms. They're both in terms of pi, so I can add them together, which will give me a total of 504 pi. And that's in yards squared. Now this is usually how you're going to want to leave your answer. You're going to want to leave your answer in terms of pi. Now I could also approximate this by multiplying 504 times 3.14, and I would get an approximation of the surface area. Okay, it's like an estimation, which would be 1,000 583 yards squared, and this would be rounded to the nearest whole number. But this is the best answer. So now let's apply what we've learned to a story problem. In this situation, we have a flower pot that is approximately in the shape of a cylinder. The diameter is 10 inches, so that's important to know. Diameter equals 10 inches. And the height of our shape, or of our cylinder, is 6 inches. Find the surface area of the flower pot and round to the nearest inch. Okay, let's try to draw a picture of what we're talking about. So we have a flower pot that is in the shape of a cylinder. Now if it's a flower pot, there's not going to be a lid here, so there's no base on the top. So in this situation, we're talking about only one base. So I'm going to represent my base by pi r squared plus diameter pi, which would be my circumference, times the height of my shape. Now I know that the height of my flower pot is 6 inches, and I know that the diameter of the base is 10 inches. So I have all the information I need to find the surface area. So I only need the area of one base, so I'm going to make it pi. 10 is the diameter, I want the radius, so that's 5 squared, plus diameter pi would be 10 pi times my height, which is measured from base to base, which is 6 inches. So in this situation I get 25 pi plus 60 pi, which gives me 85 pi inches squared. I can also approximate this, which would give me approximately 267 inches squared. But again, this is the better answer. It's the most accurate. Alright, now let's make it a little more complicated. Let's say that I have a shape that's made out of a set of prisms. Alright, now this looks pretty complicated, but there's a simple way of solving shapes that are made of multiple prisms. So first of all, let's analyze what we have here. We have 3 prisms that we need to find the surface area. Now this top prism and this bottom prism are missing one of their lateral faces because it's covered by the prism that they're sitting on. So let's draw a net of one of these, and if you look at it, they happen to be the same. So if we calculate one of them and multiply it by 2, we should be able to find the other one. So I'm going to start by thinking about what the dimensions of this piece of my 3D object would be. So I'm going to draw a net. The dimensions of this particular face are 13. Be careful here because we're looking at what this is. If you look here, it's 12. And then my other side here is 13 by 12. Right? So that would give me this face and the face over here. Now it also has, this particular prism also has a third face, because it's a triangular prism, which happens to be covered, which has the dimensions of 10 by 12. But that particular face we're not going to calculate because it's sitting on top of another shape, and that's not going to be used in finding the surface area of my shape. Now the only thing we're missing here are the two bases. So we have a base here, and then we have a base on the other side. So let's draw our base. Okay, it shows here that our triangular bases have a height of 12, so we need to show that. Because when calculating the area of a triangle, you use its height. So it has a height of 12 feet. And this part, or the base of my triangle, is perpendicular to its height, is actually 10. If you look here, it's represented here. Okay. So that would be a measurement of 10. So I need to find the area of this part of my lateral surface area, and then the area of my two bases, and that'll tell me what prism number 1's surface area is. That's the surface area that's showing of this top particular prism. So let's calculate it out. So I have two bases, which are a height of 12 times a base of 10 times 1/2. And I have two of these, one here and one here, plus and I have this rectangular lateral surface area, which is 13 plus 13, so that's this portion right here, times this dimension here, which is 12. So let's calculate this out. My two bases are 2 times 12 times 10 times 1/2 would give me 120 feet squared, plus here I would get 26 times 12, or 312. So 120 plus 312 would give me a total of 432 feet squared for this first prism. Now the second prism here, or the third prism on the bottom here, is exactly the same dimensions. You can see that the base has a height of 12 and a base of 10, and then the lateral faces are 13 and 12, just like this particular one. So if I take this and multiply it by 2, I'll know what both of those bases are. So that gives me 864 feet squared. Now I know what the top and the bottom prisms are. And I'm left with finding the area of this middle prism here. Now you'll notice that the bases of this prism are covered by the other two prisms. So I'm only calculating the lateral surface area of this particular prism. And again, I'm going to draw a net just to get an idea. I'm going to start with this particular rectangular face, and the dimensions of this face are 12 by 14. And I'm going to draw my next piece. Let's use a different color. Okay, that's going to be this right here. That one happens to be 10 by 14. 14 represents this piece here. So I've got a 10 by 14. Then I've got this other side piece, which again is going to be the dimensions of 12 and 14, and then what would be considered the back of this one, which would be measured 10 by 14. So to find the lateral surface area, I'm going to take 10 plus 12 plus 10 plus 12. I'm going to multiply that times this dimension here, which we said was 14, or the height from base to base. So I would get 44 times 14, or 612 feet squared, would tell me the surface area of the central prism, of its lateral surface area. So now I need to just take all of this and add it together, which would give me 1,480 feet squared. So breaking it apart using the nets and my formulas make finding the surface area of a shape that is this complicated pretty easy. This is the end of the video on surface area of prisms and cylinders.